So, Johannes, welcome to the Black Lodge. It's good to see you. It's winter now, so we have to stay inside where it's warm. Uh, Today, by popular demand, we'll have a discussion on your book, specifically chapter one, but it will touch on themes that actually kind of permeate the book. And I'm going to push you a little bit. You've requested me to go back, read the book, as you put it. Um, Imagine you didn't know me. More or less, that's how you put it. If you didn't know me, Johannes, you didn't know Lokad, you just walk into a store, you pick it off the shelf, and you start reading, what questions would you have? So that is the frame with which, tabula rasa, that is the frame with which I come to this. And I think on that note, actually, the very first question, and it will frame the discussion, is who exactly did you write this for?
The primary audience that I had in mind when writing the book was the supply chain scientist at Lokad.
Okay.
This is first and foremost. This is a document that gather all the insights that Lokad uncovered through a decade and a half, and to provide them in a way that is like consolidated. So it's in essence, you can think of it as a document of as an internal memo, but like the very long version, like the 500 pages version of the memo. But then I made also the book non-technical, so that, I mean, when I say non-technical, it's not littered in equations or algorithms. And I going again at the manuscript, I try to make it quite accessible to any supply chain practitioner or any supply chain executive, including people who would be short on their time. So it started with an internal audience, and then as I went again over the manuscript, I tried to make it digestible and to avoid using too much of I don't know Lokad jargon or this sort of
thing. You don't have InVision code or anything. It's very light. But just to be clear, because again, even just on the book jacket itself, you do explicitly state for specialists, for students, for professors. So you do stand by that. It is at least there's maybe a dual audience, but let's just say at least 50% of that audience is the general practitioner. That's fair?
Yeah, exactly. And when you have to think, when I say students, you have to think that the supply chain scientists that Lokad hires is typically they are typically fresh out of university. So there is kind of an overlap here.
Okay. Well, so for the sake of discussion, and I got these figures from ChatGPT, so full disclosure, but I used 5.1 thinking model for this, and I basically asked it to estimate roughly, for the sake of this discussion, how many white-collar practitioners there are in supply chain in the world today, not including logistics, just like demand planners, category managers, anyone who the average person would agree, yep, that's supply chain. And it gave me the number of approximately 10 million. So again, maybe it's a bit more, maybe it's a bit less, but for the sake of discussion, we'll just say 10 million.
There are LinkedIn groups with over 1 million members for supply chain management. So assuming that those LinkedIn groups have like 10% of worldwide, interest. I mean, since it feels, at least the ballpark feels correct.
But even if it were off, for the sake of this discussion, it wouldn't even matter. It's a lot of people.
Yes.
So, in your own estimation, if one of those 10 million people picked up a book titled Introduction to Supply Chain, again, introduction, it's not rethinking supply chain, it's not like a Boethius-style metaphysical meditation, it's Introduction to Supply Chain. One of those 10 million people picks it up. What practical tools do you think they'll come away with?
They will come away with the instruments to think the supply chain. That's really what this book is about, and to think your supply chain in the very foundations. Why do you even have a supply chain? Why does it matter? What value is there for the world at large and your company specifically of thinking of its operations through the lenses of supply chain? That's the sort of things that I detail. What are you exactly trying to achieve, and why? How should you even think basic elements such as time, information,
Mm.
intelligence.
Mm.
What is the role of computers in a modern approach of supply chains? I mean, those are very fundamental questions, and that's what I'm trying to address in this book, so that people can really think somewhat correctly about their supply chain. Because again, my beef with
Yeah.
the literature is that the literature typically goes on technical tangents,
Mm.
such as here are 57 time series forecasting algorithm, and it's not helping. It's not useful, and I would say people end up overloaded with tons of irrelevant trivia. An example would be the Association of Supply Chain Management, ASCM,
Mm.
has a score, SCOR,
Yep.
document, and here they outline, top of my head, something like 250 metrics. This is nuts. This is just nuts. 250 metrics. That's a huge amount of trivia, and it's not helping to actually understand anything about the supply chain. It's just an extensive list. It would be like approaching accounting, like here are the 250 invoice statuses recognized by the French law. I mean, this is you do not start with that. Those are very much technicalities, and that's what I'm trying to through this book is to approach through the things that would matter for every single supply chain on earth, every single practitioners, because we are dealing with really the very foundations, the fundamentals, the things that doesn't matter if your company is manufacturing airplanes or shipping, sports shoes. Those concepts matter.
Okay. I do want to come back. Actually, it's later. I will come back to the idea of the state of the literature. We will touch on that. You'll have time to comment. But staying with the literal term introduction, right at the start, you open with a quote from, is it pronounced Bastiat? I've never read it out loud. It's Bastiat?
Bastia.
Bastiat,
Yes.
yeah, Bastiat. And then you say that, and again, I am, as you'll know, I'm largely quoting, that approaching supply chain is an arduous task, in that it is both, quote, very abstract and very concrete. You argue supply chain cannot be touched, and that factories, warehouses, vessels, and trucks are not supply chain. Supply chain is, in fact, an intent, not a thing. It is a web of expectations.
Yes.
You just talked about the average practitioner. That all sounds lovely, and I'm a student and teacher of philosophy. But again, what practical differences flow from accepting that vision of supply chain?
Because it lets you direct your attention. For example, if you think that supply chain is really about the trucks and factories, should you become an expert in the way factories are actually built? Should you become an expert in how trucks are operate and their mechanical characteristic? And what I argue is no, absolutely not. I mean, because fundamentally, this is the intent that support those things. That's what you will need to understand. Again, this is why you see we are introducing through supply chain an abstraction. Again,
Yes,
this is so you will end up in a company being part of, let's say, supply chain department. The supply chain department is not building the factories.
No.
They are not. I would say, owning or even operating the trucks. So you see, this is you have to think, where is my focus? And my focus, what I say, is that this is the intent that connect all those things together, and that's really where it start to matter. That means that, for example, those expectations, what is really the customers expecting from you? That's a very difficult question, and that's what I argue in this book. This is a question for supply chain. That's what supply chain, among many other answers, will have to deliver, is what are your customers expecting from you? And you could ask this question from, what are your suppliers expecting from you? I mean, you would say payment, yes, obviously, but there is probably a million other things that also matter for your suppliers, etc., etc., etc. And again, so the reason is that we are dealing with something that is fairly abstract. A supply chain is not the only domain that is fairly abstract. Accounting is fairly abstract. Legal is fairly abstract, or even worse, marketing. You see, so that's why those
but there aren't
things.
physical objects involved in that, though. I mean, you don't have trucks to deliver legal documents or legal judgments. There is a physical domain that you are
But it needs to
not
be
really
approached
factoring
from a very specific perspective. What I say is that again, if you learn the fine print about the combustion engines of your trucks, it doesn't help. It doesn't help for supply chain. It will help for a lot of other problems, but not for including possibly repairing the trucks, but not for the purpose of supply chains. You see, that's the thing, is that's why I stated as an introduction, we need to be able to direct the attention of a practitioner to the things that are most relevant to his field.
Do you think that the average, let's say, warehouse manager is sitting around contemplating how combustion engines works?
So the average warehouse manager is, I mean, first, he's probably not really even part of this audience,
Well, you can adapt any question you like there. I mean,
but
do you think people using computers for demand planning are sitting around understanding how Wi-Fi works, or are they trying to accomplish goals?
Actually, that's the thing, is that the perversions vary, but yes, there are many planners who are, again, spending a lot of time focusing on the wrong things. Obviously, I was taking, an example that was ludicrous, such as combustion engine. But the reality is that many demand planners are going to focus, for example, on those 250 KPIs of score. And I say it's not even remotely relevant. And they are going to focus on potentially, or try to learn more about time series forecasting algorithm, which is not even remotely relevant, especially if you want to go through the catalog of the hundreds of algorithms that are known in the literature. All of this knowledge is not very useful. And that's what I'm trying to clarify, what is actually the intent, so that we can sort out what is actually useful or relevant.
Okay, so when you say useful or relevant, before I respond, unpack what you mean by there, because you're saying those are big claims. You're
But
saying a lot of information is not
we have
useful.
to go back to what is the intent, what is the purpose and value of supply chain. You see, the thing, so in the book I detail what is the intent and the purpose of supply chain, which is to essentially increase the long-term profitability of the company through better allocation of resources that pertains to the flow of physical goods. That's really the.
Aren't we in the richest state in the history of the world right now? Aren't supply chains basically generating, like, point to a time in history where supply chains generated more money than they do today?
None, but but you see.
So how is it useless, or not useful, or not relevant?
I'm saying that what is actually used in company to operate the supply chain has nothing to do what you will find in most textbooks.
Okay.
And that's also the reason why I made this book, is that I see a lot of companies where the default attitude is, yes, we are going to improve. We know that we're not using the optimal inventory formula. Yes, we know. We tried, it didn't work. So we are doing something completely different. Yes, and yes, we know that there are 250 metrics, and yes, we don't follow them. Yes, we have them in the BI report. We don't follow them, but we will improve, because right now we are busy doing other things, and we will improve. You see, that's the kind of attitude that I see among practitioners and even executives nowadays. So there is this grand disconnect with, the company is working, kind of, the supply chain operations manage to deliver stuff, kind of. It's not very automated. And what is on the roadmap are items that have been on the roadmap for the last 20 years. And it's, people try those optimal methods, and then they pull back. It doesn't work. They try to add more metrics, but it doesn't work, so they just ignore them, etc. But when you discuss with them, they would say, no, next year we will do the right thing. We will start doing the optimal thing. Next year, yes, we will start following the KPI. And meanwhile, they do something completely differently. And I believe that's the crux of the problem
Mm.
is not what they are doing presently. It's what they have in their roadmap. You see, what they are doing, in fact, and that's would be the point, is that it's actually what they do is kind of intuitively very aligned with what I presented this book.
Mm.
You see, it's not formalized as such, but
Mm.
in fact, it is much more aligned with the content of this book than the classical supply chain textbooks.
Mm.
And I'm trying to push forward is that the sort of mainstream slash classical slash obsolete ideas about supply chains
Mm.
are just bogus. They don't work. They have been tried for the last 4 decades. They have been implemented through dozens of enterprise software solutions. They work poorly. People revert to their spreadsheets for good reasons.
Mm.
And so what I'm saying is that the reason why it fails is that the sort of paradigms and ideas that have been pushed by supply chain authors, academics, consultants, is essentially a mismatch. It doesn't work operationally, and I try to produce an alternative vision that starts with the right foundations and that actually reflect what people are already doing, with a much stronger emphasis on making the most of what computers can deliver.
Mm. Okay. Well, again, you mentioned foundations, and I think at the
Yes.
foundation of not only Lokad, but the book, your overall philosophy is your own definition of supply chain. And that is, and I quote, and we're going to investigate this a
Yes.
little bit. Supply chain is the mastery of optionality under variability in managing the flow of physical goods. Okay. You also expand that a little bit more, and you say that the boundary of supply chain is crisp and it's precise. You're able to separate what is supply chain from what isn't supply chain.
Yes.
You append this with the idea that, and I quote, anything that changes what moves, where, when, or how much is a supply chain decision. You further include things like pricing, merchandising, and assortment. And you say that those are squarely within the remit of supply chain. A skeptical person seeing that for the first time, so I don't know you, imagine I don't know you, I haven't worked here. A skeptical person or executive listening to that might think, okay, what isn't supply chain under that definition? So if you look at an org chart, what isn't supply chain?
Well, there are tons of things.
Okay.
Product research,
Mm.
it's not. Branding, it's not.
Why not?
The point of
Branding influences what people want to buy.
branding is a multi-decade effort to create kind of a persona with your brand, exist in the mind of customers. It will lift all your products, but fundamentally, it is not really attached to any single product. Just think of Louis Vuitton.
Yeah.
Louis Vuitton is a massive brand that has been built over half a century. It has been steadily rising through the last 3 decades. And thus, every single product sold by Louis Vuitton has been raising in volume and price for the last probably 2 decades. The brand Louis Vuitton is not really attached to any product reference. It kind of, it's like the tide. It raised all the ships, and so
it's abstract. It's not really connected.
No, I say it is not. It is very much. It's something that is. If you look at the flow, they don't really operate on the same time horizon. We are talking of for branding of a multi-decade effort. And when you do your operations in let's say branding, you're not thinking of I need to promote this specific unit or this specific unit. You are again pushing the image of your company. That would be the same thing of Nike giving a sponsorship to an athlete. They are not pushing exactly this specific type of shoes. It is much more diffuse. So there are plenty of elements in the company that are not exactly related to, I would say, your flow of goods. Another one would be the general contractual terms when you negotiate with your suppliers.
Well, that's not a department. You don't point to general terms on an org chart. You make the claim that like
Yeah, but no.
sales,
But for example,
marketing, finance.
purchasing. For example,
Okay.
purchasing will negotiate literally
Mhm.
frameworks to buy stuff with your suppliers.
Mm.
For example, you will negotiate the financial terms, and for example, let's point the Incoterms. This is not exactly within negotiating the exact sort of legal terms and who is buying the insurance, because you see, for example, there is a shipment. Your supplier can buy the insurance for the shipment, or you, the buyer, can buy the insurance. At some point, somebody has to buy an insurance. It can be either way. Those sort of considerations are not supply chain. They are important, plenty of detail. It's not supply chain. Same thing, for example, somebody has to manage, again, that we part of procurement, that you keep up to date the correct bank numbers of your suppliers to pay them. So there is staff where sometimes suppliers, they would change of banks, so you need to send the money to the new bank account, etc. So a lot of plumbing here. It's not supply chain. Again, that's not. If we look at the allocation of resources, this is not an allocation of resource. This is merely a technicality in the way you execute your payment. This is very important. That will keep a lot of people busy. But again, this is not supply chain. So you see, there is.
I wasn't arguing about. I wasn't asking you about the allocation of resources. I was asking you about, from a pure organizational perspective, supply chain subsumes how many different departments in your view of enterprise. So I'm not talking about the allocation. I'm saying how many departments answer to supply chain.
Not that many. Okay. It's again. It's just when you think about it. I'm just pointing out that there are things that are just completely insane. That are even attempted by the market. For example, pricing. If you organize a big promotion for a product, the quantity that you will sell will go up. So probably. Obviously, those two things goes hand in hand. Trying to do one without the other is insane. And by the way, this is why in practice I've seen many companies where they treat at absolute silos pricing and replenishment. And guess what? Those people, even if they are, I would say, the organization is a complete misfit, those people will spend a lot of time through informal coordination to precisely trying to remedy to this insanity. So there will be tons of emails going back and forth to remedy to this insanity. I'm just saying that the org chart is wrong on this front. You should just have this as a single team. And again, pricing, it's not like a team with 1,000 people. It's just going to be a few people. And what I say is that it belongs to supply chain rather than to marketing. And then
and what about marketing? Because you mentioned marketing.
Because frequently pricing is under the umbrella of marketing. Not always. Some companies are already putting pricing under the umbrella of supply chain. So overall, and then for example, assortment, again, it's the sort of things where if you do not put it under the umbrella of supply chain, then whoever is dealing with assortment will need to cooperate super tightly with supply chain. Why? I mean, just take a retail network. You have 200 stores. If you decide to put a product on display on every single store, then you at least need 200 units to cover that. Yeah, it's okay. So obviously, from an replenishment perspective, it's very different if you say this product will only be visible in like the 5 flagship stores that we have, or if it's always present in every single store of the 200. So you see, there is like basic implications. And if you try to have those teams separated, you will just create a lot of friction, and thus there will be a massive email trail with plenty of Excel spreadsheets going back and forth, which is frequently the case.
So as a corollary of this point, you're suggesting what in terms of organization?
I'm just saying that, again, if we look at, for example, if we go back to the example of branding versus supply chain as I define it, do we need tight coordination? For example, branding and the people managing replenishment, no. At Louis Vuitton, again, let's pick this example. Does the people who are managing store replenishment need to have a tight collaboration with the people who are picking the next égérie for the brand? The answer is no. It's yes, if the people who take the next égérie manage to do a fantastic job, 10 years down the road, the company will have grown substantially. But you see, it is the connection is very loose, very diffuse. It will take plenty of time. In contrast, if we think about replenishment, the replenishment team needs to be in touch with the people who are managing the merchandising. So which products are going to be put on display in the shop windows of the stores? Yes, obviously, because otherwise, if you're not tightly coordinated, you won't even have the stuff that you want to put on display. So you see, what I say is that there is a practical element of the frequency of the decisions,
Yes.
and how many decisions are we talking about? Again, if we are talking of a decision that is like once a year, we don't need to have close collaboration. If we are talking of thousands, tens of thousands of decisions daily, that's a completely different game. That's where I say, okay, we need to make it tied together. Otherwise, it's just going to take forever.
Thank you. I'm going to push on to another little part of the definition,
Mhm.
which is actually one that I really like
Mhm.
personally. And I think, again, even a skeptical reader, or not skeptical, someone who's never read any work, would look at the idea of variability as opportunity and think, interesting. And again, for the record, I'm limiting. I've read the rest of it, but I realize you expand a lot.
Yes.
But it is just in case people meta comment, in case people think it's not really fair to take only the first chapter and grill you on it. But actually, the framing of this conversation is, if the average person picked it up, they're only going to
Yes.
read the first.
Yes.
You can't say, oh, but if you read to page 500,
Yeah, I
it's
agree.
so that's the perspective I'm taking here. So
Yes.
if you only read the first 15 pages, what would your impression be? And I think variability as opportunity is a great concept. That said, the example that you give, you probably recall, and again, I'm going to paraphrase here. You give the example of a bottled water producer who invests in additional capacity so that they can be strategically placed to capitalize
And
during a heat wave.
yes, and that's a real example.
No,
By the way, it's I did not name the company, but that's an actual European company.
Exactly. Okay. And you call that a textbook illustration of variability turned into profit.
Yes.
Now, again, perfectly fine. I don't think anyone would dispute that. If you've got money to burn and you can just build another production plant, sure, that's fantastic. You've got insurance. You've underwritten your own risks. Right. A skeptical reader might also look at that and say, that's kind of a cherry-picked example, because let's say there are 364 other days of the year where there aren't heat waves. So then I've just tied up millions in a warehouse or in a production plant that's doing nothing. So do you have concrete day-to-day examples of how the variability that you described can in fact be capitalized on? Because I think people would be very interested to hear that.
It again, your mileage may vary enormously depending on your verticals.
Of course.
So
We'll take retail, for example,
let's take, for example, let's start with aviations.
Sure.
Aircraft get dismantled all the time. When an aircraft gets dismantled, the market is flooded immediately with like something like 500,000 parts. That's because when you dismantle an aircraft, you have so many things that can be reused. So it creates like mini shock on the market, and the price of those parts varies enormously. Which means that if you are a fleet, should you buy when you need, or should you buy when there is an opportunity? And I would say it's kind of both. If you see a part that you don't need immediately, maybe not in the next year, but you do consume this type of parts, and here it is at like 1/3 of the usual price, maybe you should buy it. Maybe you see.
I know the example you're thinking of.
So that's where I say mentality is, okay, this variability is not just my enemy. It is also something where it's an opportunity. Do I take it or not? In fashion, that would be, if we take another example, in fashion, normally, let's say a brand do not produce in Europe. It's too expensive. But one of their products just exploded. and they have the opportunity to produce more at a much higher price, let's say in Italy or Spain.
Mm.
And the thing is that they have so much demand that they are kind of confident that even if they have to raise their price,
Mm.
they will still be selling a lot. Should they actually just do something that they don't do usually, which is go for a super close supplier that is charging twice what your supplier in Asia is charging, but then you can have that within a week for the emergency replenishment. So you see here there is an element of risk. If you do not manage to sell it, then you will have purchase at a very high per unit price, something that where the demand may collapse much faster than you expected. But again, this is it really like a bad situation? No, it's an opportunity. If you really see like a massive spike, maybe it is the opportunity to just do a massive surge on your procurement, procuring those units at a much higher price point, much faster, and expand the reach of your brand. And we can go on. You see, it's
Those are cash intensive options, though, that you're describing, or capital intensive, excuse me. If you're
yes,
talking
but
about buying an engine that comes on the market for
again,
30% below value, like you have to have money to burn.
and you see, it's you can think also of the other way around. Sometimes if you have a market slowdown, should you very aggressively a little bit crash your quality of service to diminish your the amount of stock that you're carrying to make it much lower, just because you think that not only the demand is getting down, but it might crash altogether, and you want to reduce at least temporarily your financial exposure. And if you play your cards right, maybe, and that I've seen that happening, like you lower your stocks, your inventory levels. The demand, indeed, it was low probability event, but it does really collapse for a month or two, and then all your competitors are feeling for bankruptcy, and you're the one survivor. Sometimes there, and then when the market finally recover, well, with much fewer competitors, you can renegotiate your prices higher, and business is good again. You see, it's variability. What I'm saying is that variability is just a thing of the universe, and it's fundamentally something that it's not for you. It's not for you to decide. You see, that the thing with variability in supply chain is that it exists. It's outside your control. And what I'm saying is that you should stop thinking of it as something that is bad. It just is. And now, as we accept that it exists, the game becomes, how do we try to make something profitable out of it? And that means to have this sort of opportunistic mindset where we see this variability as something that can be exploited to increase the profitability of the company.
Do you see that this worldview being exportable across all supply chains, across all companies, or do you see that there's like a minimal threshold at which you would need to have X technological
the
maturity
reality
and
is
capital?
that it is already what people are doing. I'm not, and I just described it later in the book. It is, this view is just entrepreneurship 101. So in fact, it is exactly what companies have been thinking for ages. And that's the sort of things where, and you see, for us at Lokad, that was, again, schizophrenia, where there was like the classical theory, the organization of the supply chain, and people were doing things that were completely disconnected, because they say, yes, the plan, the plan, we didn't plan that. We didn't plan the market to be flooded with parts. But now that it is, it would be stupid to not do it, so let's do it. Oh, the plan is going to be so bad. We are going to deviate so much from the plan. It's going to be bad. So maybe we are going to reduce a little bit the advantage that we are taking advantage of this opportunity, because we would be deviating too much from the plan,
Mm.
but let's try to still make a little bit of profit. You see, that's complete schizophrenia, where people would generally do the right thing, but finding excuses to deviate from the plan. And what I'm saying is that you are doing the right thing. The plan is wrong. Forget the plan. A plan that send you on a path of lowered profitability is not a good plan. You see, that's the set of things that I'm arguing about supply chain, is that variability is irreducible, variability need to be exploited, and whatever successfully exploits this variability is good, and screw the plan. It doesn't matter. It's more important to be profitable than to have a good plan.
One of the things, both listening to you now and then rereading, with my best attempt to do it with a clean mind, tabula rasa, one of the phrases, and I actually wrote it down in my notes, was Plato's supply chain. And I want to bounce this off you. Listening to your description and reading, certainly the mastery section, the idea you talk about mastery, not improvement, mastery of the optionality inherent to the variability flow. That nice definition. In that section, you describe supply chain as fundamentally intangible. It's a set of expectations about future exchanges. You give a nice example about a vendor with milk, and then the customer has, you have competing bets. I bet that I'll sell it. You bet that I'll have it on stock, etc. As a student of philosophy and a teacher of philosophy, I like all of this, because I look at it and I go, that's like, if I were to build from the ground up my vision of supply chain, that's what it would look like. It would just be this perfect understanding of the interplay of all of these forces. Now, again, a maximally skeptical but fair pushback would be, how realistic is that vision in companies that already exist, with all of the political problems? And let's be honest, politics, interpersonal relationships, dynamics, incentives, all of these things exist. And I know you talk about those later in the book, but I'm simply pointing out, if you were reading those first few pages, do you understand how someone might get the impression that that's kind of very abstract and a little bit fanciful? Or it might be too fanciful, excuse me. How do you respond to that?
I would say maybe yes. There is a degree of abstraction that is true. It's higher than most supply chain textbooks. I would say that is true. But another beef.
It's not a bad thing necessarily.
Yeah, I would say another beef that I have with the supply chain literature is that it is not simple. It is massively simplistic. It is. And
what do you mean by that? I mean, I know what you mean, but imagine I didn't know what you mean.
It's for example, it makes assumption that demand pre-exists. As if demand was a thing that was already there, and you just have to have your statistical estimator with a time series forecast to just capture this demand. This is nonsense. Demand is engineered by the company itself. There is no pre-existing demand. You have to generate the demand for your own product. This is so. What I say is that there are plenty of things that are easy, such as time series forecasting. It's very easy. I can show you a spreadsheet. I can show you how to build a moving average. I can show you how to put a cyclicity. And all of that are technically easy. And same thing, I could come up with so many quality metrics, again, score, 250 of them. Each one of them is like easy. I just need to pick a definition. This is what I measure, etc., etc. But what I'm saying is that those easy things are not fundamental. There are distraction, there are technicalities. It is, I would say, a lazy approach to supply chain, which prevents you from actually mastering anything. You see, that's what I'm saying, is that those things that are just catalogs of stuff disconnected are not, they are not building anything toward mastery. And that's, generally speaking, a problem that I have with most of those literature, is that it tends to catalog everything endlessly. And those catalogs are absolutely not any kind of essential categorization.
Mm.
They are very, very arbitrary.
Mm.
You give me 50 time series forecasting algorithm, I can give you 50 more.
Mm.
Give me 250
Mm.
metrics like the score does, I can give you 250 more metrics.
But people can put them into practice is the point. That's the challenge that's
Can
being
they?
made.
Can they? You know, I really challenge that. Can they? You have 250 metrics.
But they can choose the ones they want.
But no. I mean, okay, if we say you can choose based on what? Based on which criteria? Based on other metrics? You're going to pick metrics based on other metrics? You see, the element of choice here, you have a problem.
Mm.
You have 250 metrics and you say they can pick the one they want.
Mm.
But are they, we have to reason about that. You can just say, you roll a dice and you pick some. Obviously, that doesn't sound like a very sound approach to supply chain. You just let your intuition.
Is that what you think people are doing?
No.
Okay.
And that's precisely where there is this disconnect. That's why I say there is a massive disconnect. People are not doing that. People are doing, and that's the reason why those supply chain actually work nowadays. They are doing something that is much smarter, much more elaborate, much more fundamental. And it just happened that they usually do that feeling guilty that they are betraying the practice, the best practice. You see, it's like, yes, there is this best practice, but when I do it, it doesn't work. So I just, please don't tell my boss. I don't do it the way I should, but it just works. And when I try to do it, by the book, it doesn't work. So I'm a little bit in a pinch. So don't tell my hierarchy, but I will keep with my stuff. That's a sort of, again, complete schizophrenia. And again, you end up with those discourse that I've heard many, many times, like, we have this optimal inventory policy. There was this university professor, they showed us, yes, it's absolutely profitable. I mean, it's absolutely proven that if we were to use it, we will earn so much money. But we have tried a dozen times. It was a catastrophe every single time. So, I mean, we are keeping that for the roadmap, but next year. This year, we're just going to do other things. And yes, they're kind of wrong, but because they generate money, we are kind of okay with that. You see, this is a sort of discourse where I say, if you're doing something and it creates money for the company, then it's not wrong. It's then you are on the right path. And if you have something that is supposedly optimal, and when you try, it's a catastrophe, then it's not optimal. Again, we have a problem of terms, and that's what I'm trying to address in this book, is that there are the classical views from academia and from consultants are quite bogus. And the litmus test for that, and that's what I argue, is that by and large, supply chains have not gotten automated. And the reason is that the logic that we have at our disposal, the sort of instruments, were incorrect. And thus, when you were trying to put that in a computer, it didn't work because the thinking was incorrect. And what people did on their spreadsheet, which was correct, but very different from what the theory mainstream is proposing.
Well, you've taken the very next question I wanted to ask you about was, and we can finally unpack this, your perspective on the mainstream approach. And that is something that, again, if someone just picks up the book and starts reading immediately, I'm going to need to set the table on this one. What they'll be presented with is a quite strong perspective against mainstream practices. I would call it almost hostile of a supply chain landscape, like the current supply chain landscape, which is fine. But I would also add that, again, if I were approaching this, so let's say I'm one of those 10 million practitioners, and I just pick it up. There's also, I would say, a reasonable case to be made that there are some critical remarks about the training of the average practitioner. And again, I'm reading quotes. Feel free to correct me, but I am reading quotes. You make the claim that the quantitative supply chain literature right now fails to harness modern computing. Fine. That I really feel this is worth just reading in full, because people might think I'm cherry picking. So the actual quote.
You are cherry picking, but that's okay.
Picking. Well, I think it's kind of a striking symptom. This is in the parting thoughts. A striking symptom of this vacuum is the prevalence of self-taught practitioners in large companies. Society rightfully tolerates no self-taught surgeons. The gap between amateurs and trained experts is too vast to risk human life. Yet, when billions in inventory are at stake, enterprises routinely rely on planners who have pieced together their craft from tribal lore and blog posts. The comparison is stark, and it underscores how underdeveloped the discipline remains. Mainstream methods have not merely underdelivered, in many cases, they have actively misled. How do you square that? All of that, everything that, all of that. How do you square that with the fact that basically right now we've never been in a more profitable global network of commerce and exchange? If it's so crap, how do we explain reality as it currently is?
So again, what I'm saying is just that people are self-taught. You can go quite far. It's but fundamentally, what you have is, I would say, what you have in large companies is a lot of haphazard institutional knowledge. You see, and this haphazard institutional knowledge is I would say is an asset for the company. It is what makes a company ticks. But fundamentally, it is very much unformalized, and that's why I say it's there is no I would say massive performance gap between someone who is self-taught and someone who has a certification, because the bottom line is, if you join a large company and their supply chain team, you will be in contact with colleagues, and within 6 months, this institutional knowledge will permeate your thinking, and that's how you're going to operate. And you see, that's okay, that's okay, but that means that, where I say it's in my view, it demonstrates the fact that we don't have I would say solid
formal,
foundations, because if you take other areas where foundations, solid foundations do exist, a person that joined the company with this extra knowledge is just delivering miracles. If I were to take an example,
yes, please.
let's take software engineering.
Yes.
I have seen startups. I've audited over 100 startups during the last decade, and I have seen small teams where people with that were, I would say, very weak teams. Again, startups. So it was people who just were venturing into the software business, and they had people that were cheap but not very good. The founders were trying to, put together a little bit of software, but they were like, typically, an example would be typically former consultant, so they were not really software engineer. And at some point, they get traction, they raise some money, and they hire their first actual software engineer, someone who has formal training in software engineering and who has experience in an actual software company with a reasonable process. And this one person just revolutionized the way they operate. It's like day and night. It's an enormous gap from people who are doing like essentially monkey programming to actual modern engineering with reasonable practices. You see, that's what you get when you go from haphazard, self-taught stuff to people who have like formal education plus formal experience. That's the gap is huge. And that's the exact same thing if you were to again, that's just think of the gap that I gave the example of a surgeon. But again, just think of the gap between someone who has been formally trained as an accountant and a secretary who has been filling a little bit the accounting software, helping with accounting by copying invoice in the accounting software. After a while, someone who has been, just doing that will kind of get a feeling about what accounting is about, because they have been doing so much data entries. But the gap in terms of skills and of quality of thinking between someone who has just been, entering spreadsheets versus someone who is formally trained as an accountant is going to be absolutely enormous. and it's not something that you can really.
Mm.
And the reason why you have such a gap is that, for example, accounting has a very high quality formal training,
Yeah.
and so if you're being trained in accounting,
Mm.
it makes a huge difference compared to
Yeah.
someone who is not. You see, that's and if you can be self-taught, but
Yeah.
then you will be self-taught with an accounting
Yep.
book,
Yep.
and you will follow precisely the same process.
I don't disagree. I agree with you. But what's slightly confusing me here is the claim that if you say people are, for example, and I mean this with all respect, you're self-taught and you didn't go to school for economics. You're a mathematician, correct?
So yes, but for economics, I went through series of books that are considered as absolute
Yeah. Okay.
classics.
So you're self-taught. Okay, that's absolutely
Yes,
fine. I see no
yeah, yeah,
contradiction. So am I. I see no
yes.
contradiction here. What I'm saying is, when you say self-taught, sorry, the current state of literature is crap. More or less, my words, my summary of your position, that it's lacking. It has actively misled. The reality is, though, most people who work in, let's say, demand planning offices, they come in and they are provided these materials. These are not random people who are pulled off the street and just thrown in front of a computer and said, "Here, pick numbers." They're using formulas. They're using inherited wisdom, and that's what they're teaching themselves with, and they're making lots and lots and lots and lots of money. So I don't
No,
really
no,
fully
it's really
understand.
informal. That's the sort. People are not handed over. Here is the formulas that you should
Mm,
use. No, they have like a messy spreadsheet
mm,
left by a former colleagues, and then they will try to go through the spreadsheet, and then they will have a colleague that say, this number, I kind of feel it should be higher,
mm,
because, well, I really feel it like it. I believe in the past we kind of did it lower. It
mm,
didn't turn out so well. And here, that would be, pattern recognition.
mm,
I think
mm,
this is where you should push. And after a while, the guys, the newcomer will have the same sort of informal pattern
mm,
recognition, and they will do the job. But that's where it's very informal. It is absolutely not like,
mm,
here is a formula that you should
mm,
use. If it was shared formula,
mm,
that would be so easy.
mm,
You would just, at some point, you would have a consultant and say, I collect all your formulas, I consolidate a master document, and then we update the
mm,
software and we robotize everything.
mm,
It never happens because there is no such formulas,
mm,
and it is critical institutional knowledge, but as fuzzy
mm,
pattern
mm,
recognition techniques.
mm.
And that's the problem, is that it doesn't lend itself to a
Yeah.
formalization.
I think listening to that explanation, which to be fair is quite different to what's here, and again, we're only talking about the first 15 pages. Would you agree that you're drawing a distinction between competence and credentials? Because
Yes,
okay,
yes.
well that's slightly different now. That's quite different to claiming that people who are self-taught are basically self-taught. You'll kill
No,
yourself if you actually try to
no.
do
Again,
surgery on yourself.
yes, no.
Like
I
that's a
mean,
very
obviously,
strong.
surgery, you
It's a
have
strong
a
analogy.
practical problem. But you see, what I'm saying is that the domains on which
Mm,
you have, I would say, real foundational
mm,
materials. You are, when you're using them to progress, you're using those materials to progress.
mm,
You're progressing orders of magnitude uh, faster,
mm,
and you end up at a much better point
mm,
compared to the people who did not. For
mm,
example, when I studied algorithms, I
mm.
read a book called Introduction to Algorithms.
Yes,
It's a masterpiece.
that's your formal training, right?
Yes, it's a masterpiece. It is like 1,000 years of brain power
Mm,
of some of the very best mathematicians of the 20th century put together in
mm,
one book of a
mm,
1,000 page.
mm,
This is there is no way
mm,
that, in terms of algorithmic skills,
mm,
that a person who knows how to program but
mm,
has not read a book like Introduction to
mm,
Algorithm,
mm.
or an equivalent,
Yeah, yeah,
because there is like 1,000 equivalent
yeah.
nowadays. Okay,
Formalism,
that
yes.
that someone, there is no way that this person at algorithm is going to be anywhere near as good as me. So I could have Albert Einstein, who is just an incredibly smart person, who is trying self-taught to
Mm,
progress from, I know programming, I
mm,
want to discover algorithm, and me, who is nowhere near this level. With
mm,
this book, I will end up way higher,
mm,
just because the foundational materials are so vast and so
mm,
good and so crisp
Mm.
that that not going through this path is insanity. You see, that's the sort of things where the fact that someone self-taught
Mm.
can rival someone with credentials
Mm.
really means that the credentials are not worth much.
Mm.
You see, it's again, if you think of all the areas where credentials are really matter because they are effective, the effectiveness of people with or without is just orders of magnitude. And even if you are a genius, and when I say self-taught, I mean it in a specific sense.
Yes.
I mean someone who did not go through the
Rigorous
reference
formal-
materials.
okay.
Because obviously, if you say, "Oh, I am self-taught in accounting. I just read the accounting book," oh yeah, you're not. I mean, yes, you are self-taught in the sense that you didn't have a teacher to do that, but you went through the exact same mental, pathway than a student studying in a classroom. You see, that's not the distinction. The distinction that I'm using is the one that Feynman was
Richard
using.
Feynman.
He was very frequently saying, "Oh, I don't want to when a physicist gave me an idea, I want to I don't want to read this paper. I just want to redo and reinvent the math myself, eventually redo myself the experiment, and then I am convinced." So it has this sort of vibe like you just give me a direction, and then I discard everything that you have to say, and I will do all the math and all the experiments, and then we will rediscuss. And that was, and he was, for example, when he had to review papers, he would very frequently just look at the conclusion and say, can I end up with the same conclusion, just discarding everything in between? But that's that's a sort of journey where you're not using what your peers are progressing or very, very slightly. Obviously, Feynman was an absolute genius.
Yeah.
So
also a funny guy, actually, from what I've read.
Yes. But you see, again, when I say self-taught versus through credentials, I mean, did you went through what is considered the reference material of the field? And if doing that doesn't really make a difference, then the field is garbage. That's pretty much the statement.
Well,
in short.
but again, and I personally, I'm on board with that. But then there's that last comment there. It doesn't really make a difference. It's like, but again, the skeptic would say to that, but it does. Look at, I work at X company. We make billions of dollars per year. We're making money with the practices that you decry. Like, we're managing the flow, the global flow.
No. The practices that I decry are not this institutional knowledge that exists in those companies. That's not what I'm decrying. I'm decrying the 1 million+ papers describing inventory optimization techniques.
So are you suggesting then that in those companies you have a bunch of maverick lone wolves who are disregarding all the guidance and structure of that company?
Yes.
That was a deliberately exaggerated position.
Yes.
That's your formal position on this.
Yes, it's
okay,
the average guy who is doing inventory replenishment. He may have looked at papers giving optimal inventory replenishment techniques like twice in his life, and he's ignoring all of that. So there is 1 million+ papers on this front that are completely ignored, and people are just doing, for example, inventory replenishment based on what I said, tribal law that has nothing to do with those mathematical theories. Same thing for production scheduling. People do that with things that have nothing to do with what is formally known and published in operational research. None. That's what the statement. I'm not saying that this tribal law is without merits. I'm just saying that the papers are without merits.
So you said that sentence. You're not claiming that the tribal lore or the blog post information is without merit.
So, I mean, the blog post would be just, when I say blog post, it's
you mean informal sources of information.
Formal sources of information. Yes, it's this is what I'm saying. Those things are essentially irrelevant. The tribal law is relevant, but as a rule of thumb,
formalized.
It is not even written. It is again, think of it as pattern recognition. You sit next to another inventory guy, and then you say, okay, I would pick that, and the other guy say, yes, and then you would say, I pick 10. I think you should take 15. Just I feel it 15. Look at how it's a setup, and they say, okay, 15. You see, that's the sort of things where it's okay, it's super haphazard, and yet that's the way it's done. And what I say is that this tribal law, it works, yes. And the problem is that the reason why it never gets formalized, it's because the mainstream paradigms are broken. So it doesn't fit. That's why,
broken or suboptimal?
They are not. I mean, again, they're not suboptimal because it's not about an algorithm.
Brokens just don't work, just for the record. At least that's what I, as a casual listener, you say something's broken.
Yes.
The car is broken. It does not work.
Yes. Again, when I say it's broken, you have 1 million plus papers that claim that they have an optimal inventory optimization technique. Optimal means it can never be improved upon. That's what optimal mean. So if you tell me that you have an optimal solution, for example, again, in algorithms, if you tell me that you have an optimal sorting algorithm, and there are a lot of variety of proof, it means that indeed it is not possible to even conceive an algorithm that in the general case will be faster than your optimal sorting algorithm. And by the way, it exists and there are limits, etc., etc. So this is, and when people in computer science speak about optimal solutions, they are being used. They are really being used. So it's if you had like a crappy solution and then you see in a paper that they published a new solution where they say it works and it's optimal, it gets used. So you see, that's the interesting thing, that again, if we compare the world of software with let's say optimal solution in computer science, and literally 1 month after the publication they are used by tons of people. So you see, there is like a computer science optimal solution that is published, and then a month later tons of people are using it. Why? Because it's really meaningful, and when people have something that is generally optimal, it works and it gets used. Why do we have in supply chain 1 million plus paper that claim optimality and none of those papers are used? And even worse, when people use them or try to use them, it gives them crap results. And here we get down to the problem that this optimality is not what you think it means. And that's the problem, is that the perspective is wrong, the optimization perspective is wrong, and so you end up with a mathematical proof that is worthless. That's that, and that's why I say it's broken. It's because you have something that is mathematically correct and business-wise irrelevant.
All right. We've been talking now for more than an hour. And my last question is actually like a full circle to the start. Again, we've been talking about introduction to supply chain. And the last thing we just discussed was, again, the idea of being self-taught and autodidact. My closing question, and you don't have to limit yourself to chapter 1. You can go off-piste. It's absolutely fine. You have my permission.
Thank you.
A challenge that I again, if I were looking at this for the first time and I listened to everything you just said, a question that I would have is, and this is with respect, what makes you so confident that you admit self-taught in supply chain, self-taught in economics? No one questions your mathematics and engineering credentials. No one does that. But what makes you so confident that with all your self-taught expertise that you know how to fix all this? What makes you so confident?
So, I mean, first we have to separate. In economics, I am not self-taught in the same stance of supply chain. Economics, I went through absolute masterpieces, just you read Human Action from Ludwig von Mises. So again, the fact that there was a professor in the room is kind of irrelevant. I went through the very, I would say, the classics.
I'm taking your definition of self-taught, by the way.
And so I would consider myself as classically educated. On the contrary,
Okay.
it's, economics, that would be classic
No formal
education.
university degree on that
Yes, but
discipline.
it's
But that's
still
not an insult.
Yeah, it's just classic education.
Yes,
Same thing
that's
for
fine.
algorithms, classic educations. For math, classic educations. So for supply chain, the reality was that, so where did I start to realize there was a problem? It's because we never managed at Lokad for like 5 years to operationalize the mainstream theory. Lokad, as a software vendor, we implemented the known algorithms. We implemented those optimal inventory optimization. We implemented those time series forecasting algorithms, and it didn't work. Again and again and again. And we tried hundreds of literally of known techniques, and they all failed dismally. So it was like I would say an endless series of painful failures from 2008, 2012. And at some point, the reality was, enough is enough. It's just not working, and we are not one formula aware of getting this stuff to work. So that's why we had to discard pretty much all of the supply chain literature and restart from scratch, because it was not working. It was not a valid foundation at all. I mean, that's that's why I say the sort of mainstream supply chain theory, it just do not work. You cannot operationalize that into any kind of automation, and the reason is because the theory is wrong. That's why automation remains elusive. That's why whenever you implement those supposedly optimal formula, you still need to override half of the numbers that they produce. It's because they are fundamentally wrong. And so that's so yes, I would say, why should you go to the book? It's because this journey cost us like over a decade of efforts. And frankly, this is literally the book that I would love to have had in 2008. It would have saved me like a decade of pain. And we would have been trailblazing straight on stuff that works in production, generating unattended decisions, instead of muddling through years of stuff that didn't work. And then after 2012, very painfully and very slowly uncovering the piece by piece the stuff that was actually working.
You see, that nice narrative that you just described there is a very understandable way to pitch this, in my opinion. If you say, "Here, learn from my mistakes," no, but I'm being totally serious.
Yes.
Like, if I had the information, some people say that's arrogant. I don't think so. It's reflecting on one's own development. But the idea that Joanna's internal monologue, I learned from my mistakes, and I have cataloged as best I can so other people can avoid those errors. I don't see anything wrong with that.
Yes, and by the way, there was an early version of the draft many years ago, because I wanted to write this book even many years ago. And in this super early draft, I listed all the things that were kind of wrong with the mainstream, all the things that we had tested and didn't work. And it was so long that actually the first guy that I had like a 150-page manuscript. And the person that just had a look at this actually told me, Johannes, you need to start with what the hell are you even proposing? Because right now you're just giving me an endless criticism of all the stuff that is broken, but it's once you flesh it out, you will have like 1,000 pages of a complete rebuke, the most extensive rebuttal of the mainstream supply chain literature ever written, and people will have like no alternative. So you see, and the point was, I should not. That's why I say it's an introduction. I did not position this book as all the stuff that other people got wrong through the ages, because that would be like endlessly tedious. So
Need an
I'm going to
encyclopedia.
to kind of skip that part entirely,
Mm.
and let's go straight to the stuff that actually works. And so I need to be very terse on all the stuff that do not work, because the reality is that the stuff that do not work is like 100 times longer than this
Mm.
book. It's kind of irrelevant.
Mm.
And also that's a sort of interesting is that once you start to tackle supply chain from the right perspective,
Mm.
those this literature becomes just irrelevant, and you can just move on, and there is nothing, don't there is you will have no fear of missing out,
Mm.
no FOMO. You just realize, okay, it's irrelevant. Just like when you start to understand chemistry,
Mm.
you realize that you're not missing much by not studying alchemy. It's alchemy, they had like tons of books written on it. It doesn't matter, it's irrelevant. This is the chemistry is the good stuff.
Mm.
And that's where you should be, you should start from, not from you see, that's why when you have like an introduction to chemistry,
Mm.
it doesn't start with a 500 pages criticism of alchemy,
Alchemy.
because that would be nuts. At some point you just say, okay, the past is the past, move on, let's try to go on, let's spend time on stuff that works. As an introduction, that would not be a service to my readers to just spend so many pages on stuff that doesn't work. That's why actually the stuff that doesn't work is addressed in the very last chapter at the very, very end, where I describe stagnation.
Mm.
And but that
Mm.
comes really as the last element of the book,
Mm.
because it's probably the least actively useful element of the book.
Well, I'm sure we'll have future conversations on other sections of the book. I know people are interested to hear more about, I think it's chapter 4 is economics and chapter 8 decisions. I think those are the two really big ones that people would like to probably hear another Black Lodge episode analysis on. So I'll bring you back for that. But as we stand right now, or sit, I don't have any more questions. Joannis, as always, thank you very much. And to everyone else, thank you for watching. If you want to continue the conversation with Joannis and me, reach out to us on LinkedIn. We love to talk. And on that note, we'll see you next week. Get back to work.